She thought she could get away with destroying my property for the third time. But this time, I had a plan. You won't believe what happened next. Keep watching to see how one man turned the tables on the neighborhood bully. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are listening. Your support means everything. Alex had always been a peaceful man, someone who believed in keeping his head down and living life without unnecessary drama. His home, though modest, was his sanctuary. Nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood, it was surrounded by towering trees and a sturdy wooden fence that provided a sense of privacy from the world outside. For years, Alex's life had been predictable. Mornings were spent tending to his small garden, afternoons were for working on his classic cars in the garage, and evenings were reserved for watching the sunset in silence. But that was before Karen moved in. Karen, a woman in her late 40s, quickly established herself as the queen of the neighborhood, thanks to her influential position in the Homeowners Association HOA. With her overbearing attitude and an iron grip on the neighborhood rules, she made sure that everything was up to code. If you didn't follow her standards, you would hear about it loudly. And Karen didn't stop there. She had a habit of driving recklessly through the streets, never bothering to pay attention to anything other than her own agenda. Alex's first encounter with her was during one of her ill-tempered rants at a HOA meeting. He barely knew her, but it was hard to miss her domineering presence. But when Karen accidentally drove through his fence twice, things went from uncomfortable to intolerable. It wasn't just a minor bump. The second time Karen hit Alex's fence, it felt personal. Her car hit the corner of the fence with such force that the entire structure wobbled. Alex had been working in his garden when he heard the screeching of tires, followed by a heavy thud. The air was filled with the scent of freshly cut grass, but the calm was shattered in an instant. Karen, stepping out of her car with a slight smirk, didn't seem bothered by the damage. "Oh, Alex, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice sugary sweet. But her tone was dismissive. "I really didn't mean it. These streets are narrow. You know how it is." But Alex knew how it was. The streets weren't narrow, they were well maintained, and people drove carefully. Karen, however, had no respect for anything but her own schedule. This wasn't the first time she'd damaged something in the neighborhood, but this time, it hit too close to home. "Karen, this is the second time. Your car is too big for these streets," Alex said through gritted teeth. Karen waved him off, not even bothering to look at the damage. "It's just a fence. Don't make a big deal out of it." With that, she climbed back into her car, leaving Alex standing in the yard, fuming. As the days passed, Alex realized something important. Karen's behavior wasn't an accident. It was intentional. She had no regard for anyone else's property. No one else in the neighborhood dared to say anything, not even when Karen walked into their yards and told them how to trim their bushes or mow their lawns. The HOA, of course, was silent. After all, Karen had the power to dictate the rules. It became clear that Alex was left to deal with the mess she created, both literally and figuratively. One late afternoon, as Alex was enjoying his well-deserved rest on his front porch, it happened again. The familiar screeching tires and the all-too-familiar thud. He had just put his book down when he heard the sound. Karen had done it again. But this time, the damage was much worse. The left side of his fence was almost completely destroyed. The wood splintered and cracked, leaving a jagged hole that was impossible to ignore. Alex's blood began to boil as he stormed outside. There was Karen, once again, climbing out of her car, looking as though nothing had happened. "Karen!" Alex shouted, his voice firm but full of raw frustration. "How many times do I have to tell you? You can't keep driving like this." Karen turned to him, a nonchalant smile on her face. "Alex, calm down. It's just a little fence. No big deal. No big deal." Alex's voice grew louder, his fists clenching at his sides. "This is the third time. You've done more damage than I can keep up with. If you keep this up, I'll be forced to do something about it." Karen's eyes narrowed, a hint of challenge flickering in her gaze. Go ahead. I dare you. The whole knows how to handle things like this. You won't win. Alex stood there, stunned for a moment. It was as if Karen knew she had all the power, and she wasn't afraid to flaunt it. But Alex wasn't the type to back down. He wasn't going to let Karen walk all over him any longer. That night, Alex sat at his kitchen table, trying to cool his head. His mind was racing with thoughts of revenge, but not in the way one might expect. He wasn't a violent man, and he didn't want to escalate the situation with Karen. He just wanted her to understand the consequences of her actions. His eyes fell on the wooden beams of the fence. He could fix it again, but how many more times would that be? No, this time, he needed a solution that would make Karen think twice before ever speeding through his yard again. The idea came to him in a flash. What if he could set up a harmless but effective trap that would stop her in her tracks? Something that would damage her car, but nothing permanent. It had to be something that wouldn't put anyone in danger but would get the point across loud and clear. Alex knew that Karen wouldn't stop unless she faced some kind of repercussion. He spent the next few days gathering materials: thick rope, pulleys, and mechanical triggers. It wasn't a grand scheme, but it was something subtle. The idea was to hide a small obstacle within the fence, something she wouldn't notice until it was too late. And when it happened, the mechanism would activate, causing her car to temporarily stall, forcing her to face the consequences of her carelessness. The more Alex thought about it, the more the plan made sense. It wasn't violent, but it would be effective. It was the only way to get Karen to realize that her actions had consequences. The next afternoon, Alex watched from his living room as Karen's car appeared in the distance, speeding down the street as usual. His heart raced as the moment of truth approached. She was getting closer, and Alex could see her accelerating. He took a deep breath and silently hoped the trap would work out at just the right moment. Karen's car hit the trigger. A small barrier, hidden within the fence, caused her to hit a sudden obstruction. The car jerked forward, and there was a loud pop. A tire had burst. Karen's car immediately stopped, the air filled with the unmistakable sound of air hissing from the damaged tire. Alex's heart pounded as he watched Karen climb out of her car, eyes wide with disbelief. She was stranded. Karen's voice broke the silence. What the hell? This is ridiculous. Who would do something like this? She paced back and forth, her frustration evident. Alex felt a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt. This was exactly what he had intended, but now that it had happened, it felt different. He had sent her a message, but now, as he saw her struggling, a tinge of doubt crept into his mind. Had he gone too far? He knew he hadn't hurt her, but her humiliation was palpable. Karen, realizing that no one was around to help her, fumbled for her phone. Alex couldn't help but smirk. This was the very consequence she needed to experience. She had crossed the line too many times, but the story wasn't over yet. There were more twists to come, and Alex was only just beginning to realize how deep the rabbit hole went. It didn't take long for Karen to storm over to Alex's front door, fury written all over her face. "This is outrageous," she screamed, her voice laced with anger. "Who the hell thinks it's okay to sabotage my car? You think you're funny, Alex? I'm calling the HOA. You're going to regret this." Alex stood calmly, arms folded across his chest. He wasn't angry anymore, just resigned. "Karen, you've hit my fence 3 times. This is the 3rd time I've had to repair it. What do you expect me to do? I gave you enough chances." She glared at him, not even trying to mask her contempt. "You'll regret this. I'm taking this to the HOA. You'll be sorry." Alex didn't flinch. "Do what you need to do, but you're not going to get away with this. Not anymore." As Karen stormed off, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. He had crossed a line, but in his mind, it was a line that needed to be crossed. Karen was nothing if not relentless. The next day, she began her campaign. The whole meetings, the calls, the emails, she was determined to have Alex punished for what she considered a malicious attack. But Alex had a different view. As the days went by, Karen's complaints became more elaborate, painting Alex as a vengeful, irrational neighbor. She told anyone who would listen that Alex had rigged the fence with the intent of harming her, even going as far as calling the police and claiming he'd put her life in danger. But the police simply shrugged off her accusations. There was no evidence of foul play, no harm done, just a flat tire and a bit of embarrassment. But the whole wasn't so easily dissuaded. The board convened, and Karen had a captive audience. The meeting was long, and the HOA members were all ears as she spun her version of events. She made it clear that Alex was not to be trusted, and that his actions were the result of a personal vendetta. Alex, however, wasn't worried. He had expected this. The hole was Karen's domain, and he had no intention of fighting her there. He had already made his peace with the fact that the hole wouldn't be his ally. But he wasn't about to roll over and take it. That night, as Alex sat in his living room, he heard the unmistakable sound of tires screeching. Without thinking, he rushed outside to see what was happening. To his disbelief, it was Karen once more driving down the street with reckless abandon. She wasn't just speeding. She was looking for trouble. And this time, she found it. She swerved sharply to avoid a pothole, lost control, and slammed straight into Alex's fence once again. The impact was so violent, Alex could feel the vibration in the ground beneath his feet. His heart dropped as he watched the damage unfold. This wasn't just a dent or a scratch. The fence had been completely torn apart. Wooden beams lay scattered on the lawn, and the whole structure was in ruins. Alex's gut twisted in anger, but as he watched Karen's car slowly come to a stop, something inside him clicked. It wasn't just frustration anymore, it was something deeper. As Alex stood over the wreckage of his fence, he couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. How could someone be so reckless? How could Karen not care about the destruction she had caused? But even as his emotions boiled over, he knew what had to be done. This was no longer about just a fence. This was about sending a message that couldn't be ignored. In the days that followed, Alex's life began to unravel in unexpected ways. The neighbors, who had once been friendly and supportive, began avoiding him. The quiet little neighborhood that Alex had come to love felt cold and distant. Some neighbors sided with Karen either out of fear or simply because they didn't want to get involved. Others whispered behind his back, calling him the crazy neighbor who had resorted to violence. But what no one realized was that Alex wasn't crazy. He was frustrated by a system that allowed people like Karen to run roughshod over everyone else. Karen had crossed the line, and Alex wasn't going to let her get away with it. He began working on his final plan. This time, he was going to make sure there would be no room for excuses. No way to blame him for what was about to happen. He would use the very thing Karen had taken for granted, her entitlement. He spent the next few days fortifying the fence, making sure it was stronger than ever. But hidden within the structure, Alex set up a mechanism, something that would cause Karen's car to experience more than just a flat tire. This time, the trap was going to hurt her pride. A week later, the day arrived. Karen drove through the neighborhood as usual, her car zooming past Alex's house. He watched from behind the curtains, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment. He had made sure everything was in place: the trap, the obstacles, and the hidden triggers. All he had to do was wait. And then it happened. Karen's car approached, and just as Alex had predicted, she hit the trigger. The fence mechanism activated, causing Karen's car to jerk violently forward. The impact was harsh, but this time, there was more to it than just the typical frustration. This time, the car's engine sputtered, and the car was immobilized. Karen, clearly shocked, got out of the car, cursing loudly. She walked around to the front of the car, muttering angrily to herself. Alex stepped out onto the porch, his eyes locked on her. "This is it, Karen," Alex said, his voice cold but calm. You can't keep doing this. I warned you. Karen spun around, her face flushed with anger. What is wrong with you? This is insane. You're insane. Alex stood his ground. You've been terrorizing this neighborhood for too long, and no one's willing to stand up to you. Well, I am. I've had enough. Karen glared at him, but for the first time, Alex saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to realize that her actions had consequences. The aftermath of the incident was nothing short of dramatic. The neighborhood, which had been divided over Alex and Karen's feud, began to unite in a way that no one had expected. People who had been silent observers suddenly began voicing their opinions, some in favor of Alex, others still backing Karen. But for the first time in years, the community wasn't afraid to speak up. Karen, for all her bravado, had underestimated the power of a neighbor who refused to be silent. She apologized to Alex finally, though her apology was begrudging. But Alex, despite the satisfaction he felt, knew it was time to move on. The war had taken its toll on him, and in the end, it wasn't worth the strife. As for the HOA, they did nothing. They ignored the incident, as they always had. But Alex had learned something valuable through the whole ordeal. Sometimes, it wasn't about winning. It was about standing your ground, showing that even the most powerful people have limits, and that you don't have to bow down to intimidation. Karen moved out of the neighborhood a few months later, her departure sudden and unexplained. No one ever saw her again. Alex's fence, though, remained stronger and more resilient than ever, just like him. The neighborhood, too, began to heal. People learned to speak up, and Alex became a quiet hero in his own right, someone who fought not just for himself, but for the spirit of the neighborhood that had been lost to fear. As the sun set on another peaceful evening, Alex stood in his yard, looking out over the quiet streets. The storm had passed, and though the scars would remain, peace had finally returned. It was a small victory, but it was his. Months passed since Karen's departure. The neighborhood slowly began to recover from the tension that had gripped it for so long. The once dense streets now felt quieter, more serene. People had started to come back together, albeit reluctantly at first. But Alex, ever the quiet observer, began to notice a change in himself. The vengeance that had fueled him for so long had begun to settle, replaced by a strange sense of relief and, oddly, pride. However, peace was fleeting. One day, a new family moved into Karen's old house. Alex had hoped that whoever took over would be respectful and low-key, someone who would respect the boundaries that had been ignored for so long. But when he saw them unloading furniture into the driveway, his heart sank. The father, a tall man with a brusque demeanor, was already eyeing Alex's fence. He seemed overly curious, as if assessing every detail of Alex's property. The mother, a woman with a sharp smile and calculating eyes, noticed Alex watching and waved politely, but there was something unsettling in her gaze. Something that hinted at more trouble to come. The new neighbor, Richard, quickly made his mark on the neighborhood. Not unlike Karen, at first, his actions were subtle minor complaints about the condition of other people's lawns, small issues with the local parks, and criticism of the HOA's inefficiency. But Alex knew better than to dismiss it. It wasn't long before Richard's concerns began to edge closer to Alex's fence. It started with small comments. Richard was just curious about how Alex had set up his fence and how it had survived after Karen's car had collided with it. Alex felt an uneasy knot form in his stomach. It seemed like Richard had been keeping tabs on the neighborhood's history, particularly on Alex's long-standing feud with Karen. One evening, as Alex was tending to his garden, Richard approached him again, this time with a more direct question. "I've been thinking," Richard said, his voice calm, yet with a hidden edge. "That fence of yours. It's kind of an eyesore, don't you think? It's been repaired so many times. It's almost like you're trying to block the rest of us out." Alex's jaw tightened. He didn't know why, But something about Richard's tone rubbed him the wrong way. "It's fine as it is," Alex replied, his voice steady but tinged with warning. "Well, we're planning to make some changes around here," Richard continued, taking a step closer, his eyes narrowing in thought. "I think the whole might be more open to some updates. Just a little renovation. We wouldn't want your property to drag the neighborhood down, would we?" Alex didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied Richard's face, noticing the subtle threat in his words. Richard wasn't just talking about aesthetics, he was subtly challenging Alex's space. A new, different kind of conflict was brewing, one that seemed eerily familiar. The days that followed were filled with subtle tension. Alex noticed Richard spending more and more time around the neighborhood, but his movements seemed calculated, deliberate. Richard had begun to speak with the other neighbors, gaining support for his so-called renovations and upgrades. It was clear now that he wasn't simply trying to integrate into the community, he was attempting to take control. It wasn't long before Richard's influence began to seep into the HOA. He found common ground with several members, appealing to their sense of order and progress. Meetings became dominated by his suggestions for improving the neighborhood. Even the smallest issues, like trimming hedges or repainting mailboxes, were now treated as major concerns that needed immediate attention. The focus had shifted, and Alex felt himself being cornered once again. Richard wasn't just another neighbor. He was a man who knew how to manipulate the system, how to turn every small issue into a weapon. Alex had seen this kind of power play before, with Karen, and now it seemed as though the cycle was repeating itself. As the pressure mounted, Alex found himself questioning whether he should simply give in, let things slide, and focus on his own life again. The thought of another battle was exhausting, but the thought of letting Richard take over the neighborhood the same way Karen had was unacceptable. He spent nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. Should he confront Richard directly? Should he take action like he had before, with his traps and mechanisms? No, that wouldn't solve anything. This wasn't about fences anymore. It was about control. So Alex did what he always did when he felt cornered. He observed. He watched Richard, his every move, his every conversation with the HOA. He listened to the whispers of neighbors, trying to gauge whether they would side with him or Richard. The divide in the community was growing, and Alex knew he had to be careful not to make the same mistake he had with Karen. One day, Alex overheard Richard talking to another neighbor, an older man named Tom. The conversation was hushed, but Alex's sharp hearing caught every word. "We'll need to move quickly before anyone else notices," Richard was saying, his voice low. "We've got the HOA on our side now. It won't be long before Alex is out of the picture. He's not going to fight us. He'll fold just like the rest." Alex's blood ran cold. The situation had escalated beyond simple neighborhood disputes. Richard wasn't just trying to change things, he was orchestrating a full takeover. Alex knew it was time to take a stand. He wasn't about to let Richard destroy everything he'd worked for. The quiet peace he had fought for was now at risk again, and this time, it wasn't just a matter of a damaged fence. This time, it was about something deeper: his home, his privacy, his place in the world. He began collecting evidence. Every conversation Richard had, every suggestion he made to the HOA, every manipulation tactic he used, Alex documented it all. He reached out to other neighbors who had started to see through Richard's facade, people who were quietly unhappy with the changes he was pushing. Alex couldn't fight this war alone. He needed allies. The tension in the neighborhood reached a breaking point when Richard pushed for a vote in the HOA to approve a major renovation project that would affect the entire community. It was a proposal that would modernize the neighborhood at least. That's how it was sold, but Alex saw it for what it truly was: a way for Richard to gain full control, to push his vision onto everyone else. It was time for Alex to confront Richard, not with traps or mechanisms, but with the truth. The whole meeting was scheduled for the following week. Richard had already rallied support, but Alex wasn't about to let him win. Armed with the evidence he had gathered, Alex walked into the meeting with a quiet confidence. As the meeting began, Richard stood at the front, presenting his vision for the neighborhood. His voice was smooth, persuasive, but Alex could hear the underlying arrogance in his tone. He was already thinking of himself as the leader when the floor opened for discussion. Alex stood up, his presence commanding the room. "Richard," Alex began, his voice steady but full of authority, "you've been playing this game for a while now. You've been manipulating this HOA, turning neighbors against each other. But it ends today." The room fell silent. Richard turned to face Alex, his confidence beginning to crack. "I've documented your every move," Alex continued. "Your attempts to control the HOA, your tactics to isolate those who disagree with you. These are not the actions of someone interested in the good of the community. These are the actions of someone who wants power." Richard's face flushed with anger, but Alex didn't back down. The room was now fully engaged, the once passive neighbors listening carefully. Alex had their attention. "Everyone here deserves to be heard," Alex said. "No one person should have the power to dictate how we all live. We are a community, not a dictatorship." The tension in the room was palpable as Richard sputtered, trying to argue his case. But the damage was done. The whole members began to speak up, one by one, acknowledging Richard's manipulative behavior. The vote that followed was decisive. Richard's proposal was rejected. Richard stormed out of the meeting, defeated, but Alex knew this battle wasn't truly over. However, for the first time in a long while, Alex felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had fought back not with traps or tricks, but with the truth. The neighborhood began to rebuild. People started talking to each other again. The silent divide that Richard had tried to create slowly healed. And Alex, ever the quiet warrior, found peace once more. But as he looked around at the neighborhood he had fought to protect, Alex knew that while the past had been full of conflict and frustration, the future held something brighter, a community united, stronger than it had ever been before. And in that moment, Alex realized that true victory wasn't about revenge, it was about standing up for what was right.